Hello there. Welcome to Let's Talk Research. I'm Dr. Charity Marsh, the director of the Humanities Research Institute, or the HRI, at the University of Regina. Let's Talk Research is produced in Treaty 4 lands, and the University of Regina is situated on Treaty 4 lands with a presence in Treaty 6. These are the territories of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation. Let's Talk Research is a podcast focusing on the diverse, innovative, and critical research that is supported by the HRI. Dr. Kathleen Nolan is a professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Regina here in Canada, and her teaching and research focus primarily on curriculum studies, teacher education, and critical and culturally responsive pedagogies. And I'm going to ask her to explain that a little bit more. But just to note that Kathleen's interest in global justice and international development led her to conduct research into child sponsorship, and specifically this study that we're going to spend some time hearing about today, called Engaging the Public in Critical and Justice-Oriented Global Actions, Moving Beyond Child Sponsorship. So why don't I just ask you about that, because it's a bit of a mouthful, and to try and explain to people what your research is about and what you do.
For sure. Well, it is a mouthful there because they're both kind of coming from different directions in many ways, right? My experience is in the area of curriculum, mathematics, teacher education in general. And as you mentioned, culturally responsive pedagogy is an area that I've moved into, especially in the mathematics education area, because mathematics has a way of being very direct teaching and not necessarily focused on equity and social justice. And so this is an area that I've been very interested in. And it overlaps in many ways, I think, with this research project, because it's based in social justice concerns, equity-based concerns, global justice. And so this project that I began, about 4 years ago, I began doing some research on child sponsorship. And it really just came out of my own experience of feeling uncomfortable with child sponsorship through my life, not really ever sponsoring a child, but not really knowing why I was feeling uncomfortable with it. And then over the years, I've had many different volunteer opportunities with non-governmental organizations who are involved in charity work, but they're also involved in education and advocacy. And I would see them struggling, like a lot of NGOs, struggling to fundraise, struggling to support their partners in the global south. And yet, at the same time, child sponsorship is making billions. It's fundraising billions every year. And so I started to do research to look at what exactly motivates people to want to be a child sponsor. And that was the first project. And then I realized, well, people were asking me the question, well, if not child sponsorship, out of a concern for global poverty, then what? And so that's how I came to this project, which is really looking at moving beyond child sponsorship into these more justice-oriented actions.
It would be really good to hear about this discomfort, because I do feel that a lot of people probably have that, right? There's this sense, especially the way that child sponsorship is mediated to us. And so the strategies that are used there, maybe you want to talk or unpack that a little bit for people, and what are some of the critiques of that kind of, selling? It's a marketing of like good feeling and charity, and for people to, that marketing of like, here's a way to be a good citizen on a global scale. And then you also talked a little bit about that tension around, so they're raising all this money, and then how is this money being spent is another, I am sure, big tension. So maybe we could just look at those two things at first and see, what your feelings are there, and how this project, maybe some of those very specific questions at the heart of the project.
You're right. That's a packed question, because there's so much involved in why I was drawn to the project and what I learned from the project. When I did the research, in the beginning, the first project, I understood that there were a number of motivations for people becoming involved. And that's on their own personal motivations. And one of them, of course, is a feeling of guilt for their own privilege, for their own position in life. And other reasons are just, for altruistic reasons. They just want to be a good person. They want to help or feel a personal connection. And so there's a number of motivations. Some even get involved because they think it will advance the project of development, even though I think that for your average person in public, a public citizen, the project of development is framed in a way that makes it look like the South just has to catch up to the North. We've got what they want. And so they feel that maybe by trying to eliminate global poverty through this child sponsorship or alleviate some of the concerns, they can help the South catch up with the North. And there's so many problematic aspects in that. I mean, first of all, the idea of trying to catch up to the North is misleading, I think, for many. The problems with thinking that we are advancing the project of development or that we are having a personal connection with this child feed into the marketing strategies, I think, of the child sponsorship agencies. So they've been doing this fundraising for many, many years, decades. And so I think the agencies know what works, and the face of children work. Unfortunately, I think that the ethics of using the children in this way, their photos, their profiles, making someone feel like they're going to make their situation so much better, so much closer to maybe what we have in the North by donating their $35 a month, without regard to their family or community necessarily that they're picking this child from. But organizations or child sponsorship agencies have tried to move more to a community approach. And they have found that people want this personal connection. They want to put this picture of a child on their fridge. And it's very unfortunate because it is using children, even if the funds are not necessarily earmarked for the children. The funds can go to a number of ways of helping the community or the family. And so that's a problem with the marketing strategies. A big problem, the major problem, I think. But there's also other ideas that they perpetuate. For $35 a month, you're going to alleviate global poverty, but it sends the message that if we all sponsor enough children for long enough, the problem of global poverty will go away. And that again is very false, very misleading. And I guess also it lets people think that they're doing something good, and that's enough. And it's an easy go-to. It lets people off the hook for deeper thinking.
So can we kind of maybe unpack that a little for folks and to understand, the North depends a great deal on the South for much of its ongoing living, consumption, all of these kinds of practices. So if I ask you to kind of explain that a little bit, how might we reframe that?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's probably one of the biggest learning experiences for me in the project. I am not an international development expert, but I did interview some. And I think that because I'm trying to create materials, educational materials for the general public, I consider myself a member of the general public in this area. I have no experience studying critical international development. And so my participants have really shared a lot of their insights with me about the nature of money flow from North to South, when in fact, we tend to think that our donations are the important contribution to the South. But what happens is we have so many corporations in the South. The money flow actually from the South to the North is much greater. And I think one of my participants actually said it was about 6 times greater than any amount of money, even with remittances, any amount of money that goes to the South.
Let's hear from Dr. Peter Ove, a sociologist that participated in this project.
It's this distribution of money transferring from the North to the South, which is seen as the route to poverty alleviation. Just like we can't see official development assistance, right, where Canada sends money overseas, as the solution to global poverty. It is part of the solution, but it ignores the underlying connections. Like one of the one of the key teachings in international development is often that money flows more from the global south to the north than vice versa. And it does this in all sorts of ways, but it does this, for example, in, the products that get created in factories overseas, where the profits of those products go to northern corporations. And the wages are depressed in these places, right? So again, it gives them job opportunities, but the real money isn't in the work. We all know that in a capitalist society. The real money's in the profit, which flows to the north. And sometimes in the design of products, which also with the designers being located in the north, flows to the north, right? So the money is flowing more in one direction. So even if we send money overseas, it's like trying to empty our boat with a hole in it with a little bucket, right? The water's pouring in. You got to patch that freaking hole to empty the boat.
So it's partly in these corporations as well as Tide Aid, various things like this that not everybody is aware of. And they think that we're just the North helping the South without realizing how complicit we are.
It's almost that mythology and those romanticized narratives of the deficit, right? One of the things that's super important about this kind of project is unpacking or for us to unlearn, especially the general public, about these kinds of situations where we think we have an understanding and that we're doing good, but perhaps that doing good is causing harm. And so how do we think about that in this kind of way? How can we unpack that? And this takes us to your project where you've created some strategies and tools, which I'd love to get to. But I think tell us a little bit about the project. Like, who did you talk to? Who were the experts that you drew on? How did that play out for you in that kind of way?
Yes, I started off by looking at a variety of people from different backgrounds, academics, consultants, NGOs. So I sent invitations to approximately 25 people and organizations to ask them if they would be willing to be interviewed. And now keep in mind that they have a consent form to sign. And so there's a lot of information on the consent form. And even the title of the project, as you know, is Moving Beyond Child Sponsorship. So that was obviously had an impact on people and whether they would perhaps volunteer to speak with me. And so I was a bit disappointed, but not surprised, probably, that of the 3 or 4 child sponsorship organizations that I contacted, no one was interested. There was one person who works with a child sponsorship organization, but she was being interviewed sort of on her own, not representing the organization. So I was hoping that I would be able to talk to child sponsorship organizations who might be able to say why they felt that their work was important. But as it turned out, I had about 18 different people. Some of them were academic researchers in the area of international development studies, sociology, education, anthropology, and global citizenship education. And then I had a number of directors and coordinators of non-governmental organizations. So I had people involved like from Development and Peace and Kairos and Saskatchewan Council for International Cooperation, a number of representatives, as well as independent humanitarian consultants and global fundraising managers. So it really was a diverse perspective. And I had a series of questions that I asked everybody, but then I did a little research on each person to understand more what the expertise they had to offer. And so then I had a number of questions just for them that I felt could contribute to my understanding and ultimately to the educational materials.
It is important to understand when you're inviting people, there was no deception. So it was very clear in the project of, your thoughts around child sponsorship and what else could happen instead of, or what could we do differently that might have better impacts. And so that's an important note for researchers and for folks listening in that sense of how research has to be done through with ethics and how we go through this process. But then also having a list of questions that everyone gets asked, but then that understanding that each person comes, they have their own experience, they are coming from their own background, their own engagement in the world. And it's really important to have that opportunity to ask them questions that are specific so that the richness of the project can come.
Also, they came from very, very different, like I had participants, of course, majority from Canada, but also from United States, Australia, New Zealand, Ecuador, Colombia, Switzerland. So they really represented a diversity of perspectives. And of course, child sponsorship is something that is quite global. So everybody had experience with it from a variety of perspectives.
You've talked about the ethical concerns around using children as a way to draw people in. It creates a kind of empathy. And it's for those that are able to do that, to sponsor a child and pay that every month. It's like this checkbox. I'm doing my good. I'm doing my part so I can carry on with my life as it is without it, thinking about how I'm implicated in these systems, these global systems that continue to go. And I generally, for example, I would privilege from living where I live, engaged in the way that I am. So maybe we could think about that question of, well, if not child sponsorship, what are other possible strategies for engaging in a practice where I'm giving back to community, where I'm making a difference? What else can we do and then have impact?
Yes, that's the important question in this project, because so many people, the first project that I did, it was just left there to say, yes, okay, I agree with you. This is not the way to go, but what do I do? And so, one thing that everyone should probably reflect on is that global poverty is very complex. And so perhaps we need to be quite skeptical of anything that presents itself as quite simple, right? There are no simple solutions to global poverty, and they are not going to be easy solutions. So they will challenge us in our lives. And so, we can say that this is a short-term fix, child sponsorship. And even if we think, okay, it's not doing harm, it's a short-term fix. But how long does one want to continue with these short-term fixes when child sponsorship has been around for more than 60 years? So, it's just time to dig deeper into our lives, not just into our pockets. And part of doing that, digging deeper into our lives, I would say is maybe it's kind of think of a two-prong approach. The first one is to get involved with organizations who really do understand or are working to understand the complex issues with global poverty. And they work directly with partners in the global South. And again, I still continue to use the North-South language because it's most readily adopted right now. But so these organizations will fundraise. Part of their work is to fundraise to support the work of their partners in the South, but they don't stop there. They actually have education and advocacy programs for people here in Canada to understand why it is that their partners in the global South are experiencing what they are. And some of that could be helping out with a partner in the global South who's dealing with a Canadian mining company. And so we need to know that. We need to be educated on what these mining companies or what these various companies are doing in the global South. And then we can advocate for change. So it has to have those three parts to it, not just the fundraising, but the education and advocacy. And it was one person from an NGO, I recall, she said to me that so many of the partners that she works with in the global South through her organization have said to her, work on Canada. Canada is the problem in the global South. So it's not the idea of going in and fixing them. It's fixing what we're doing here that is impacting the global South.
Let's listen to some of the thoughts of our colleague, Dr. Simon Gronowski-Larson.
Honestly, that the answer that I get asked the same question by students, what can I do question. And I really think that political advocacy in Canada aimed at shaping the foreign policy and the decision-making of Canada is more important and has more potential impact in the South than all of the money that Canada gives or Canadians give through NGOs. And so I try and shift people's thinking away from, where in the global south can I give my money, to how can I contribute to pressuring for a Canadian foreign policy based on justice rather than exclusively the economic national interests of Canadians. And I think it's hard for people to appreciate that even their petitions and voting here in Canada is a really impactful sort of potential direction of their action, much more so than if they're giving $20 a month to something.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's also an aspect of wanting to look out to the world and contribute directly to it. But we have to see ourselves as the people who pull the strings on a really big actor that acts in the world, and helping to have an influence on those actions is really important.
That's sort of the first prong, I suppose, is finding out about those organizations who have partners and support them, but then leading into that idea of fixing ourselves, looking at ourselves, reflect on the decisions that we make in our own context. So that can be what and who we invest in. Do we invest in mining companies that are causing this destruction of livelihoods and lands? Who you vote for locally and globally. Think about global citizenship lens and do your voting that way. So those are at least two actions that I think are very important. They're not simple. They don't let us off the hook because we may not very well like some of what we see and find out.
What is it that you could contribute to your own community? People are in these situations where there's direct help and need, and there's ways to directly impact and provide for one's community.
Moving from charity to justice to solidarity is very important. Or in fact, not moving between them, but understanding what each of them means. And it isn't that probably charity isn't going to go away. If we address the root causes of poverty, then we don't maybe need the food banks eventually. But doesn't mean that right now we don't still need that charity to help our community. But the problem with the child sponsorship, I think, is that people do see it as, and it's promoted as something that will make a difference by itself almost, because child sponsorship agencies really don't educate. There's no education or advocacy. And it's because some other research that I read, it's partly because people don't want to hear that. People want to hear that they're doing good by giving their monthly contribution. And the education and advocacy work is extremely difficult and complex.
So tell us a little bit more about this. That was the first prong. Now you have the second prong to tell us about this other parts of strategies.
Oh, well, those were sort of the two in one, I suppose. One was supporting the Global South, or supporting organizations who work with the Global South. And the other one is looking at our own lives, looking at the decisions that we make in terms of the voting and who we invest in, and whether it's things that we buy, our consumer habits, all of those. Though that's the tough part, because it will bring us change, not just in financial resources, but a change of lifestyle, perhaps.
There are a number of outcomes in your project, in your research project, a number of knowledge mobilization or knowledge translation. We use these big terms to basically say, we have some really cool resources that have been created to assist people in educating themselves, finding ways to engage. For you, some of the resources around teaching, specifically around curriculum development and pedagogy. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those?
Well, the main form of knowledge mobilization, well, I guess there's two right now. My main form is the website, which I'm calling a tackle box. So it provides the tools for tackling global poverty by moving beyond child sponsorship. And that is designed as a website because, since my primary concern was that this be accessible to the general public and especially to high school and university students, where there's definitely quite a strong presence of child sponsorship organizations in high schools. And I really think that global citizenship education in high schools and students in high schools are capable of much deeper more critical thought. And so I'm hoping that this tackle box will be a useful resource for teachers and students, as well as just the general public to learn about the issues. I'm designing a website which is structured around 4 drawers in the tackle box. And each drawer has a number of compartments. So the drawers are, first of all, just why not child sponsorship? And then the second drawer looks at what is the difference between charity, justice, and solidarity, and how do they all relate to child sponsorship? And then the third drawer is looking at the relationship between child sponsorship and global citizenship, asking the question, okay, so can I be a global citizen and still sponsor a child? And then the fourth drawer is finally the one which has all of the ideas for alternative actions to child sponsorship. It responds to the, if not child sponsorship, then what? And so within each of those drawers, there are voices of the participants. So some of them are presented as text, some as audio, and some as video. So it gives kind of a variety of media for people to inquire into these. It's designed in such a way that they can jump into one question or one compartment and learn a little bit and come back another time because, it's heavy material. It's meant to challenge our beliefs and our thinking. But I think it's very accessible just because, as I mentioned before, outside of my realm of expertise. And so I was asking the questions to really try to make sense of the issue. And that I'm hoping very soon I'll have a review team looking at it and giving me some good feedback. And then I think we're going to be able to launch it very close to the launch at the end of April. So that will be nice. And the other project, or I suppose offshoot of this that I have on the go right now is that I was commissioned to write a piece for New Internationalist magazine, which is something I've been reading for 40, 50 years. And so I'm very pleased to have a piece coming out in the May-June issue, which is the 40th anniversary of the article that they published called Please Do Not Sponsor This Child. And so my article heading is Please Continue Not to Sponsor This Child. And it refers to that 40-year-old piece and what has changed and what has not changed.
Very exciting. I mean, of course, right? Accessibility in the classroom, accessibility all around the world, then, really, if you have it online, which is helpful. And that, of course, for young people, so much of their ongoing education, even in the classroom, is happening online. And how exciting that you've been reading this magazine all these years, and that you're able to that you're invited to participate, and that it's a response to something 40 years ago that is still an ongoing concern. What was the sort of coming out and writing that piece? What has changed? Or maybe the question is better is what hasn't changed?
Well, in fact, the original heading, or maybe they'll go with both headings, was the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so I would draw on quotes from the author of that article 40 years ago, Peter Stalker. And then I would write about how it has not changed. In fact, the same motivations are there. The same kind of marketing still happens. Very little has changed. And I don't know if people have changed in their views. They're still raising, as I said, worldwide billions of dollars through child sponsorship. So if you think that the general public is becoming more critical based on all of these different movements that we've had worldwide, I'm not sure it has, because the same sort of advertising attracts people in millions. So
can you tell me a little bit about how you started the article? Like what were you getting at? What were you trying to do?
Well, I was trying to get the point across that the advertising, you almost go to the opposite extreme, that is sort of absurd that you would do this. So I start the article by saying, did you know you can design your own child? Because Compassion International has on their website this almost an app where you put in how old your child, the sex of your child. At one point, you can even put in like the country, of course, but you can put in if you have a favorite birth date that you would want. And so they will search the child for you to try to find the match. And then there's World Vision, who was trying to respond to the critiques about picking children. And now they've turned it around and they have a program called Chosen, where the children get pictures of the adults and they pick. So in other words, now the children say, I want to receive money from that person, and they pick from it. So there are a number of very disturbing marketing strategies. Because they raise so much money, I suspect they have found that they work, which is, I suppose, even more disturbing. And then the child sponsorship agencies will say, oh, but we now help communities, we build wells and whatever. But if you ask them, how do they advertise? How do they gain their sponsors or their donors? It's through the children still.
When children live in poverty, their nightmares become real. 6-year-old Enzalani watched her mother die in agony. Now, she's so sick from drinking filthy water, she's terrified she'll be next. 9-year-old Sonia has to sleep on the dangerous streets, and if no one helps her, that's where she'll stay. Please, will you help us end the nightmare of poverty for innocent children like Sonia?
So that is still, as you said, those are us. We're responding to that. And we could refuse to respond to that. But apparently, many people still do respond.
The notion of doing good, right? Again, coming back to those acts of good citizenship and thinking you're doing something much wider or better for the world. You're somehow through this program and contributing to this program.
And even if you don't see it as doing something better, even if you are honest with yourself, as best as you can be, and you say, well, I know it's only a little, and I'm not really bringing this child out of poverty. I know that. I'm just doing my part. But I think if you keep rationalizing it that way, then you don't end up understanding the harm that it actually can cause by continuing it.
So on that level, that's not so hopeful. But the resources, the tackle box, that's hopeful.
And then it is important. I've had to remind people that the research started with, why do we need to move beyond child sponsorship? And that's what this tackle box is about. It's not about trying to present a balanced perspective so that people can continue to feel good about if they're a child sponsor. This is really very much educational on the fact that it is time to stop child sponsorship, to examine our lives from a different perspective, and not to be falling for these marketing techniques that the agencies use to make us feel good or feel that we have a personal connection with someone across the world that is just a picture on our fridge. It's a matter of, being comfortable in uncomfortable spaces, as they say. And, my experience with students is that if you shine a light on something that needs deconstructing and needs to be looked at carefully, that everybody wants to immediately move to a new solution. But when things are complex, we can't always understand, the next best, the next easiest approach. These are complex issues and complex actions. And so we need to sit in those uncomfortable spaces, I think. And that's okay.
I agree. I think it is. Yes, it is okay to be there. And as we make change, not to expect to see the results of that change as having, serious impact immediately. We're such that sense of immediacy, right, that we need. And that's not what this is. This is change that's going to take a long time, but it's such important work.
I realize the material that will be coming out of it and the knowledge mobilization is challenging, and it will challenge our perspectives and our lives. But I think that it can be done in bits and pieces. And I think the important thing is just to realize that we really do need to move beyond child sponsorship as a simple solution to global poverty, and to not think of ourselves in the North as the ones that everybody is striving to be like and live like. But in fact, we're complicit in creating so many of the conditions that the South has to live with. We need to examine our lives and not look for the easy go-tos and let us off the hook.
Congratulations on the work and on, making a difference in the sense of the resources that you're providing.
And I think it's important to, my goal is to hopefully connect this a little bit more closely, even with global citizenship curriculum in high school, so that there is a deeper level, more critical thinking that goes on in those courses. So there's still more work to be done, I guess, in terms of taking this information, this tackle box, and moving it into different contexts like high schools.
Let's Talk Research is produced by me, Dr. Charity Marsh, and I'm supported in this project by my tech-savvy and creative research assistant, Maria Azam, and the fantastic folks at Roman Empire Studios. You can find Let's Talk Research on the HRI website or on your favorite podcasting platform. Thanks for listening.